Novel Ideas. This is our podcast where we talk with political professionals about creating a new playbook for democratic media. We're talking with our industry's best and brightest to amplify the new strategies that we need to win because we know we can't win the future with the same old playbooks of the past. I'm Rachel Campbell. I'm an industry vet of politics and digital media. I'm CEO at Novel Messaging, and I love talking with smart people and turning hot takes into action, which is exactly what my good friend here, Alex Wall, has been up to. Today, we're talking with Alex Wall, Chief Strategy Officer at Resonate, a new organization he just co founded that aims at meeting the demands of the modern media and political landscape. He's a political strategist with experience working on multiple presidential campaigns. He led the social media program in the Obama White House, and he has held leadership positions at a handful of large and impactful progressive organizations. Now he's building infrastructure to help progressive voices break through the noise year round, not just in the weeks before Election Day. Amen. Welcome, Alex. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. This is great, Rachel.
Awesome. Well, Alex and I have chatted about many things over the years, but in really like since 2024, we've been talking pretty regularly, and I'm really excited for folks to get to hear more about what you're up to at Resonate, and sort of like how you got here. But to start, just to give folks a little bit more flavor on you and sort of how you think about the world, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you come to this work, and sort of why you stay in it.
Yeah, totally. Well, super great to be talking with you as always. I'm going to turn back the clock a little bit just to give you a sense of sort of why, despite how awful our media environment is right now and the political environment is right now for Democrats, why I'm still in this work. But originally New Yorker, born in the city, go Knicks.
Okay. Like, actually
Yeah.
born in the city.
In the city,
Wow,
but
that's like
I grew up. I'm, kind of a dual origin here because I grew up mostly in the Lehigh Valley area, Easton, Pennsylvania, which, as political junkies know, is a battleground state or a battleground district within a battleground state, and so candidates would be coming through constantly. Like it wasn't quite Iowa, but it was close. Like we saw, like Bill Clinton came to my high school, Al
wow.
Gore came through, John Kerry was at the community college that my dad taught at. And so I would say the big story for me that I remember most clearly was the 2000 presidential election recount coverage.
Yep. Hanging
And
chads and all that.
oh my God, it was awful. Although it really is the villain origin story of where we are now in so many ways. But I was like I'm dating myself now, but like my eighth grade self was very frustrated, first confused of like, wait, so the guy that won the most votes isn't actually winning the election. Like, what the hell is going
Yeah.
on here?
Yeah.
Supreme Court just being like, okay, sure, like this candidate is going to win versus another candidate. And so I quickly, the injustice of it all just like really pissed me off. And so
Yeah.
I started getting way more into politics after that, got into media. One of the like foundational political books that I read that has really stuck with me is Don't Think of an Elephant by George Lakoff.
I haven't read that
Um,
one, but I've heard about it. Yeah.
it's a good one.
Yeah.
It definitely informed my early thinking on a lot of things, but basically he breaks down how political messaging connects to cognitive science and
Mm.
linguistics. He really gets into like the neuron connections in your brain. And it really gives kind of a science-based approach as to why, the way Democrats communicate, these sort of fact-based cerebral approaches to how we talk about issues don't exactly resonate with a lot of voters
Mhm.
compared to a values based sort of stories approach that like our brains are just like evolutionarily way more likely to digest
Yep.
as positive and as something that we can grasp and understand and retain. So started thinking of this dynamic a lot more about how like we've got so many super smart Democratic nominees. They have all these really smart, super wonky policy ideas, and yet people over and over again, as we all know, either don't know that they exist,
Mhm.
or to the extent that they do, they've heard like disinformation,
Yeah.
filled like through this kaleidoscope of, distortions that they've heard across whatever social media platform, Fox News, etc. And so, a lot of that was obviously even before social media really started to take off, and so, that sort of grounded like these two problems that I
Mm.
sort of think of as my North Stars when I do this work. One, what is the thing that we're trying to communicate and is it digestible to the
Mhm.
audience that we're trying to reach? And then two, like, are we actually trying to reach them in the places that they're actually getting their information? And so as I started to get into social media, did some work in, the climate space early on, some comms work and field work, and then on the Obama campaign and the Obama White House, digging in more into how can we actually meet people where they are. And it's
Mhm.
been a challenge over many years and many cycles, but those are sort of the fundamental questions that I'm asking as I get into all this work.
It turns out those are kind of important questions that not enough people have competent answers to in this moment. So we're really glad you're asking them, and really glad that you're not just asking them, but like supplying answers or tools to help us answer these with your work. Which is a great way, so you've already sort of teed this up a little bit in just how you think about the world, but, we like to ask our guests to sort of frame what's one thing out of the many possible things we could talk about, what's one thing that you think Democrats are sort of getting wrong in this moment, or that you wish more people understood, or sort of like the thing that's keeping you up at night? You've already outlined your sort of 2 North Stars, but is there any other, like, specificity on how that's taking shape today that's really, worth some attention, you think?
Definitely. It's hard to pick just one, but if I had to say, I think one thing that, we're super focused on right now is there is just a huge misconception and I think fractured understanding of how people are getting their news, where they're getting their news. And I think that, over sort of the broader democratic and progressive ecosystem, it creates a lot of misplaced investments
Mm,
in communication strategy, whether it's organic, whether it's paid, whether it's owned, whether it's field work, across the left at large. And I guess I sort of like to think of this, the media landscape at large, into sort of two different eras. We had for many decades the legacy media
okay.
landscape where everything was very centralized. It was focused around traditional institutions, newspapers,
Mhm.
TV networks, magazines, et cetera, where information really flowed from the top down. Professional journalists were the ones that were, giving us information, and so the funnel was very small. It followed, formal editorial standards. Only a third of Americans now get their news from information and or from television, and even fewer from print at this point.
Yeah.
Um, Fast forward, we have now for many years been in a modern media ecosystem, which is way more fractured across social media, across podcasts, streaming, gaming platforms, etc. As you know very well, information flows through so many different creators, influencers, digital first outlets that are, building direct relationships
Mhm.
with folks. And more than half of Americans now get their information from these decentralized platforms. And if you look at folks under 30, that's over 70%. And so I think most folks, you and I, and so many of our colleagues in digital communications within democratic circles understand this, but our investments and sort of our overall approach to the landscape has not caught up. And so our strategy is in this, legacy landscape. Our actual needs are in this modern landscape, and that's
Mhm.
just creating so many problems on so many fronts.
Yeah, I think that's, like, such a succinct diagnosis, and that's essentially the same problem that we identified and why we started Novel and why we're called Novel is because I think we really need to sort of meet the moment with more innovative strategies and tactics. But when you use the word investments, let's unpack a little bit more about like what that means. Because I think, yes, there's like the literal where people are investing their resources, but I think there's like a lot. there's a lot of granularity there that matters. It's not just about, like, where funders are putting money, it's also about, like, staff structures and what tools we think are worthwhile and what data infrastructure we build and what even gets labeled as data infrastructure. Like, so can you talk about sort of how you view the investments that are being made or the investments you would rather see be made here?
Totally. And obviously we have a particular approach to this, so a little bit biased, but I think, I would say it falls into sort of three categories in my mind, or three initial categories. One is like, we have no idea what the map looks like of information across our space. And so getting more investment and just more sort of shared understanding of like, what do conversations look like across all of these platforms? Who can actually drive a conversation? We are in large part, it's like democratic operatives are living in this world where we're like driving around a city, and we don't have Google Maps. We don't have a physical map. We're just like, oh, this creator looks interesting over here. Oh, look at this new TikTok trend over here that's getting a lot of views. And so just in investing in a shared sense of like, here is the landscape, and like, how do we measure it? How do we compare apples to apples across different platforms? What is the value of, a view on Instagram meme versus a view on a longer form podcast or,
Yeah.
YouTube show? So really digging in, a lot of investments that we need to make on the infrastructure, on the analytics infrastructure piece of all this. The second piece is just like training up our elected officials, candidates, progressive voices. We have, particularly down ballot and particularly, among younger folks, there are a ton of great communicators within the progressive ecosystem. Those folks have not yet, necessarily risen to the level of like, certainly not the nominee or, a chunk of our, members of Congress. And so, but figuring out, how do we give folks the tools and resources to understand, what podcasts should they be going on? What YouTube shows should they be consuming and should they be thinking about? Or what creators should they be collabing with and creating content with? And then giving them tools and to say, hey, like, going on CNN is very different than like hamming it up with like Andrew Schultz on Flagrant. Those are two very different conversations. And so making sure that, electeds and principals within our world have that understanding and have that training.
And how many
And
of
then
them even know the names that you just said?
exactly, exactly. And then the last piece I would say is like, it's great if someone goes on a really interesting show or engages with a really interesting creator, but if you don't actually have a plan on distribution and being able to amplify that content, you're not gonna, that content's not gonna get nearly as much traction as it should. And so, as operatives, there's a ton of investment we need to make in amplification and distribution and coordination of not only the existing progressive channels that can actually drive a conversation across platforms, but like, we need a ton of investment in new channels and new
Yeah.
media companies and new, incubators for new creators and influencers that can rise to the level of, playing a role in all of this.
Yeah, okay, so many things. So on the first piece, on the sort of what is the landscape and how do we define that and how are we measuring all this? One thing that's always frustrated me as a digital practitioner is there's sort of this mindset because historically data and analytics has meant polling and public opinion research and focus groups.
Yep.
Or maybe some modeling that we append to the voter file and some scores, and that's deemed real data. And then when you present people, like the irony is like we have more data than we know what to do with on social media. We have a ton of data about reach, likes, engagement, shares. Like there's infinite, not infinite, but a lot of data points, a lot more data points than we have on traditional or legacy comms. But there's like this sense of when we do things on social, it's like, "Oh, well, what does that even mean?" Or like it's like this sense of like, "Well, we can't really quantify what impact it had." And it's like, "Well, wait, here's a lot of data right here." It's like, "But that doesn't really tell us like what our voters think or what impact it had in shifting opinion. Like only polls can do that kind of is like kind of the attitude.
Yeah,
So this has just been something I think it's going to take a lot of time and education and frankly, like, getting some different voices in leadership positions who are more fluent in some of the data that does exist, but this has always been one of my biggest
totally.
pain points is, like, it's not that we don't have data, we have a ton of data, it's understanding how to properly contextualize that data that I think has been the gap. Anyway, you have done more in this space than I think most folks in our industry, and certainly you're one of the people I think of first when I think about how meaningful social listening can be, how meaningful digital like narrative measurement can how to do that well and in ways that are super applicable. You've been doing it well, and maybe we'll get to this in solutions, but you've been doing it a lot at Resonate. So I'm eager to like dig in on that. For folks who don't know, Alex has just launched a new organization, and they one of your main things is you've got this new Substack that publishes daily with an overview of the landscape. Do you want to talk us through a little bit about like, how that connects to this conversation we're having about this gap.
Totally. Yeah. Thanks for the plug. But
Great.
yeah, so first of all, our monitoring hub team,
Mm,
which our
mm,
daily Substack called What's Resonating, written by Carly Evans and Eric Gould on their team. They're really smart. Everyone should go follow them and read their stuff. But the way we think about it is we break down, to give you a sense of the data, we're tracking around 10,000 accounts across 8 different
mm,
platforms. So basically, all the major meta platforms: YouTube, TikTok, Threads, Twitter,
mm,
etc. Blue Sky.
mm.
We even have a little bit of Truth Social that we're
Nice.
starting to build into here, and more platforms to come. But we also look at a bunch of the top left leaning pages, right leaning pages, and then neutral political accounts. So that's sort of been our bread and butter. We have like a huge database there. But one of the theories of the case for Resonate is, how are we getting progressive messages, messengers, narratives into the ecosystem, not just within political conversations, but really broadening that out to the intersection of politics and culture.
Uh-huh.
So increasingly, we're trying to figure out how can we actually look at conversations going on in the sports world or personal finance or health and wellness, parenting space, and then mount those back to political issues, to political values, or even broad progressive issues or topics that, or conservative certainly that. Um, aren't necessarily coded as political yet, but provide opportunities. So, an emerging narrative, let's say in like the F1 space that we think, left leaning pages might have an opportunity to jump on, or something in another space that conservatives are really jumping on, and trying to get those insights identified accurately in
Mhm.
terms of both volume, in terms of who are the instigators and who are the accounts that are driving those narratives.
Mhm.
How many engagements are they getting? What do the view counts look like? And from there, trying to get all of that information packaged up into the hands of all the folks that run the largest pages on the left, across platforms. So whether that is media companies, whether that is creators, whether that's other large pages across the board,
Mhm.
we need to make sure that folks that are making decisions about where to make communications investments and where to put their strategy are seeing these opportunities on a regular basis. Because we know the right is so good at this, where, seeding something like critical race theory, or, seeding something on, anti-trans news, like
Trad
they are just
hives, like,
exactly.
yeah.
They are just so much better at this than us. And so first, before we can even act on that, we just have to identify what those narratives are and how they're starting to percolate.
And it's not like okay, this is my favorite part of the newsletter. Everybody go subscribe. What's resonating.substack.com. It's really great. This part, the cultural part, is like where I scroll to first, honestly, because even yes, like there's immediate strategic opportunities to take cultural narratives and like use them as opportunities to message our values, and we should do that. But I also think like step 1 is too often I think our side is bad at realizing like most people actually don't care about what's happening no matter how bad or scary. They're worrying about, like, Love Island or, like, whatever. It's like and I think that section of your newsletter is so grounding and, like, the vast majority of content on the internet has nothing to do with what we are so concerned with, and I think that that's really important for developing a meaningful strategy that's actually gonna meet people where they are and engage them, like, it's yeah. I really appreciate that it's just, like, even present in the conversation that, like, we're wading into these cultural waters, and yes, we have a lot of political work we need to do, we need to talk about politics, but we need to understand the landscape we're operating in, and this is a huge piece of that landscape. Um, so I just wanted to say that. Um, you were also talking about your sort of second piece you outlined was about getting candidates more tools. One piece I wanted to just ask you about that I've been thinking about a lot, and we've talked about this in a couple episodes, but like it used to be that the most effective communicators were the ones who could be the most disciplined, right? Like it was
Hmm.
about repetition and staying on message and finding ways to pivot. And in the current media landscape, I feel like a lot of the issues that we have are that the elected officials we have got there because they were good at a skill set that now hurts them in this new media landscape, which is much more rewarding of authenticity and kind of raw, off the cuff, reactionary, emotional content. And that was like driven out of a lot of the electeds
Yeah.
early on. And so I'm just curious what you've seen with knowing how many folks on the Hill that you guys have supported over the years. How do you balance like now risk is rewarded, authenticity is rewarded, discipline kind of comes across as like phony or canned. Like how do you talk to electeds about that?
Totally, totally. I would say a couple things. I think one, not every show or every creator or every topic is for everyone. Like I think one of one of the key, and don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but like, there are certain, elderly senators that cannot get on a Twitch stream and talk about gaming, or,
You don't
you
say.
know, it's not Love Island is only going to be, a topic that so many members of Congress can talk about. And I
Yeah.
I do, it does excite me when you look at, the work of organizations like Run for Something that are working with down ballot candidates. And like obviously as millennials and Gen Z, become more of the electeds and the candidates that are, getting into, spaces where they can start building up their profiles, this will become easier. But for now, it's trying to figure out and match like, okay, like, there's a senator or someone from New York who can, chat about New York sports teams, or there's, someone who's super into the food scene and can like cook and just like hang out in their kitchen and, talk to folks about, issues that matter to them in really plain terms. Or there can be super geeky stuff. Like there's, around certain shows, around certain fandoms. There's just so many different corners of the internet where we
Yeah.
need progressive voices talking. And so part of it is like matching people to an audience where they can speak authentically, is so critical. We don't want to put someone into a position where it was actually Jasmine Crockett had this quote earlier this week on Hassan Minaj's show, where it's like, you need a coach that can put people in the right positions to succeed, and you're not going to put, a point guard guarding a center. Like
Yeah.
that's just not something that's going to work well. But if you put them on the right show, talking on the right issue with the right creator, they're way more likely to succeed. um so that's one big piece. And then I think the second piece, to your point about authenticity and being more off the cuff, is like, you have to make news. Like if
You
you
would
just kind of
her
go on a podcast and go through your talking points and like, sure, that's fine, but unless you're going to get that 1 30-second clip or one
would
45
her
second clip that a bunch of folks in the political space, in the broader cultural space, or in the news space are actually going to be interested in sharing, that the impact of that appearance is only going to go so far. And so working
Mhm.
with folks to figure out, hey, it's not just like this is my message, it's what is going to be thought provoking, what's going to be
Mm.
interesting. And I think that's a big piece of, really any appearance, honestly.
And it really is, like, core to comms or, like, when I was coming up even sort of when legacy media was still sort of the dominant force behind comm strategy, we would still have to think about this stuff. It's, like, always been part of it. I don't know, I feel like we've, like, lost our way there a little bit. Like, I love a good gimmick. I love a good shtick. Like, we used to, like, send people out in costumes to troll, like, the opposition at different like, there were all sorts of things that we've always done that were about generating attention. We just have to do that, like, at a higher volume now and maybe with, like, bigger audiences. Anyway, okay. I wanna pivot into and we've already covered a lot of this, but, like, we've ID'd a lot of structural problems, sort of resourcing problems. Anything else we wanna say on sort of defining I mean, there's, like, honestly so many that it's hard to summarize, but, like, the landscape has changed. We need different tools and different approaches to better meet people in that landscape. Or is that sort of where we're landing here? Or anything else you wanna add before we jump into, like, what we can do about it?
I mean, oh man, I would say I think it is not sufficient to just be on these platforms. I think not only operatives but also the folks that are making decisions at the highest levels of these organizations and these campaigns really need to just like get on these platforms and get a better sense of like what is the cadence of
Oh my god.
a particular show or a particular person. It's like you've got so many people talking about like who is the next Joe Rogan, and like none of them have actually sat down and watched an episode of
Yeah.
Joe Rogan's podcast. So I think more fluency. It's like
Yeah.
people that work in this space know all the cable anchors and they know all the reporters at the New York Times and the Washington Post, and it's really just sort of an education and like um understanding gap that I think is another big issue we need to solve quickly.
And I'm gonna be a little even spicier. I think there's honestly or I have experienced that there's like a touch of elitism in it where there's almost like, "Oh, well, I'm not on TikTok." Like there's like a it's like that's for the plebes or something, and like
Yeah,
I'm busy over here with my New York Times and Washington Post reporters, and it's like, if that's really how people think about this. Like, if you think you're you couldn't be bothered to be on the platform that a majority of Americans are on and consuming news on, like, how do we
yeah,
expect to win if that's our
right,
attitude?
right.
It's really frustrating. I have started it's hard because, when you do this work, I don't know if this will resonate with you. I feel like I'm always, like, pushing. I'm always the one who's, like, pushing us to try new things, and I have sort of had to, like, choose how and when to pick my battles on these kinds of things, but I have this is one thing I have started consistently calling this out where if someone is like, "Oh, well, I'm not on TikTok, so I don't know." I'm like, "Well, maybe you need to be."
Well, why? Yeah, right,
Like
right,
like, is that cool? Is that okay? Like, that's like I feel like that's saying, like, "I don't read the news." Like, that's not cool to admit
right.
out loud anymore. Like
Which sadly too many people fall into that camp, and that's why we've gotten to this mess in the first place. But
yeah,
and
yeah,
it's I think too it gets back to sort of goals and audience, which
yeah,
I think too often we don't necessarily define as specifically as we should on so
yeah,
many campaigns, whether it be issue campaigns or electoral campaigns. And if your goal is to like influence the Senate parliamentarian or like, super like staff on a particular committee that are marking up a bill, like, great. Go to legacy media, go to the New York Times, go to Twitter, like all of that, not to discount that. But if you're actually trying to reach real voters in
mhm,
2025, it's
yeah,
like, you have to fundamentally change your strategy.
yeah,
It's like, CNN gets what, like, not even like 500,000 average viewers on some of their, primetime shows now, and that's like a, decent post from some of our top progressive influencers on like a random Tuesday.
This has been, like, another anecdote that has brought this to life for me. We've helped launch a couple candidate campaigns this year, and in a couple instances, we partnered with content creators to amplify the campaign's launch, and the different campaign teams have always been slightly skeptical or unsure until, like, the moment where it, like, crystallized is when the candidate starts getting a bunch of texts from their friends and family saying, "Oh my god, one of my favorite creators on Instagram talked about your campaign." And, like, that was the moment where it was like, "Oh, this is real." And it's just such a funny thing because, like, the data has been telling us this forever, and to your point about, like, viewership counts, like, just open your phone and, like, see the view counts on some of these videos, like, these are real numbers, but for some reason, unless it's, like, on the 5 o'clock news or unless it's covered by the local paper, we don't treat it as seriously, even though the views on that might be significantly less than a creator could get. So, anyway, it's just been something I've been living in, like, very specific circumstances. It's like, yeah, you
Yeah.
turns out people watch creators. I don't know if you
Right, right. Who would have thought?
Okay. So we've talked about a lot of things that you're up to. There's a lot of big problems about us meeting these changes and the infrastructure we need, the different attitudes we need, the different fluencies we need. Um, and I know you have like a lot of things that you are doing to help on all of these fronts. But if you wanted to like boil it down, what is sort of your novel solution, or how would you sort of point us in the right direction towards the things we can be doing to be better in this moment?
Yeah, totally. And I started to tease this a little bit before, but I would say, in order to build an effective communication strategy, like we have to have that overarching map, and we have to be able to regularly take the right insights from that map and get them into the hands of all of our communicators and all of the folks making decisions on communication strategy. And so, what's resonating Substack, we mentioned, is just kind of one initial product to give folks sort of a daily cadence of that. But ultimately we need to figure out, what is a much more robust sort of set of, insights, observations. We're building dashboards on particular topics and keywords, and on, clusters of personalities, to really give folks a sense of like, you know, who is driving a conversation, who are the folks in a particular cultural sphere that are open to progressive values and democratic values, and, may mention them, on 2 out of every 10 shows, but the time that they do is so valuable. And so,
Yeah.
even before we can figure out how do we make more of those moments and get, more of our voices into those spaces on a regular basis, we need to be able to know when they're happening on a regular basis, and not, I mean, how quick the internet works. Obviously, it's like when we can figure that out the hour after something posts as opposed to several days after or a week after, that gives us a huge opportunity to actually make an amplification moment out of something,
Yeah.
versus, the lag time on all of that. So broader insights and more timely insights into the hands of communicators is really important. I'll give you sort of two examples
Yeah.
from our monitoring this past week that, one, these are a little bit more political, but I think it kind of gives you a sense of the types of things that we're looking at.
Yeah.
So, obviously, the one big beautiful bill, passed and signed into law by Trump, horrific on so many fronts, so many terrible implications for millions of people. We have really struggled to get traction as a movement on this, both when we're trying to pass
Yeah.
um, RIP to Build Back Better, and then the Inflation Reduction Act, which did so many incredible things and was such a huge accomplishment for so many reasons. And now so much of that law has been taken out. And
Yep.
in both cases, both when we were trying to pass the IRA as well as when we were trying to defend it, for the most part, it was a blip on the radar. So we went back and looked over the last month, in the lead up to the bill getting signed, looking at all left leaning pages, and only in two cases did the percentage of posts that was about the one big beautiful bill rise above 10% of
Wow.
overall posts from
Wow.
left-leaning pages. And it's like, I would not have thought it was quite that low. Like if you ask any operatives working in our space, so many folks are doing a lot of really good hard work on this bill and trying to
Yeah.
defend it. It was 1/10 of our content for the most part. The two sort of blips, one, the Trump Musk back and forth initial Twitter fight in early June, where he shat on the bill, Musk did, and so Trump had to defend it. And then the second was in the lead up to passage, when people were, when ostensibly it was probably too late to
Yeah.
really, influence the debate. And so, that raises a lot of It's like, we had
Huge.
Iran, we had Israel, we had so many horrific ICE instances, and obviously all the raids in LA and the protests in LA. There were so many moments, more recently with the Texas floods, and it is just so hard to break through when you have this sort of,
Mhm.
throw shit at the wall, Trump approach to the news cycle. And so it really is a sobering reminder and moment of, if we are not coordinating, if we're not getting smart about how to weave our values and our priorities into cultural conversations or other news stories that are actually getting more attention, we're not going to get heard on this, super in the weeds policy bill in Washington, D.C., when most people just aren't paying attention. So that was really eye opening just to
Yeah.
see that data. But yeah, it's a huge challenge.
It's so tough because it's like these pages, a lot of them are not necessarily run by like mainstream institutional Democrats. A lot of like the biggest left leaning pages are kind of more grassroots folks who like have built their reach by like riding the wave of the day and posting something that's going to help get their reach and engagement. So when there is something like this where we as a party need to organize and come together to drive a coherent message consistently with kind of like one band, one sound. Um, it's hard because our party didn't build this infrastructure. So we don't really like control this
Yeah,
infrastructure. It's a lot of voices. And it's important. Like that's part of what makes, we're not as big of fans of authoritarian structures over here on the left. So there's a lot of pros to this. It's a bigger tent, there's more voices, but it does pose a lot of challenges when the main voices in our ecosystem are not necessarily like institutional voices, and the institutional voices have not prioritized building the infrastructure we need, and so we can't drive a message in a coordinated way unless we get cooperation and whatever. But then there's also this piece of like, do their views dip? Do they not get as much engagement on those posts? Like because Ezra's been talking about this a little bit lately on his pod about like people wanna cover controversy, people wanna cover
yeah,
uncertainty, and if, like, the bill's gonna pass, people are like, "What's the story?" But, like, that can't be the answer. There is plenty of story, like, let's talk about all the rural hospitals that are gonna close. Let's talk about the Planned Parenthoods that are gonna close. There's plenty of
totally.
stories to tell. We just don't I can't tell if it's a mix of control or lack of infrastructure or kind of all of it.
Yeah. I mean, there's like the low hanging fruit solutions, of which we are, constantly looking for. And then there's the big structural pieces that you mentioned. I think on the low hanging fruit, I mean, one thing that we did notice that we tried to get out to all of our partners was we looked at posts around the one big beautiful bill that used some version of that language of like literally saying, one big beautiful bill, or one big betrayal, or
Yeah.
any sort of iteration thereof. I know there were so many long debates about like, how do we brand this bill? What do we call it? Do we say a budget bill? Do we use Trump's phrase and air quotes? And one thing that we noticed is, when folks used a version of the actual bill name and Trump's phrase, plus a specific cut whether it was storytellers talking about rural hospital closures, like you mentioned, or the number of people that were going to lose Medicaid coverage, versus posts that were just a little bit more generic and sort of tied to like healthcare is under threat,
Yeah,
like, call your member of Congress now. We saw way more average engagement on posts that use the specifics and use
sure.
that language. And so there are easy ways to, get more lift in the algorithm. And I think there's just like, the singles and doubles of just like making sure that all of our communicators are doing that on a regular
Mhm.
basis. But then there's the structural piece of just like, I think we need to get way more creative in how we're actually seeding a conversation and then
Yeah,
driving it. And in most cases, I think it is using something in pop culture or using something in the news and bringing it back to why are Republicans and Trump screwing this up for people?
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's also like if the story is Republicans are doing a thing and Democrats hate it, it's like, well, duh. But, this is a bigger thing. But I think part of the answer has to be we also have to come with some of our own ideas and brand them and communicate them effectively too. So it's not just the story. We make it easy when the story is just that we're fighting again. Like, but if it's more
Yeah,
about like different options for people to weigh and like discuss, then I think there's more room for engagement. And we haven't always done our work on that side. But
yeah,
it's not about the algorithm. That's a bigger
yeah.
problem.
Well, and I think there's a piece of this too where, as institutions, we need to, well, the party, the, leadership in Congress, leadership throughout the party apparatus, we need to look and say like, hey, institutions are super unpopular right now, like whether it's in media, whether it's in government, whether it's, the military, religion, like people are just really anti institutions right now. And so, there are narratives that can sort of talk about the corruption across our government at large, or talk about like, you know these people need to be held accountable for stealing from people, cutting their health care, taking food off the table for struggling families, and giving tax cuts to billionaires. Um, I think, there are a few communicators that do a good job of that. You look at AOC, you look
Hmm.
at Bernie, you look at Mamdani.
Hmm.
I think we need to lean into that and not just make it about sort of like Democrats are for this and Republicans are
Yeah.
for that. Like I think we have to lean into like the actual institutions have failed and we
Yeah.
have to find a new way forward.
Yeah. It's just, yeah, we did some work last cycle to learn more about like trust, and just trust is at like record lows across the board on everything from science to government to even like religion, like all of our institutions. And I think there's like something to it too. The medium is the message a little bit. And um back in the day when we would like make political ads, there was like kind of a narrative of like, keep in mind your ad is going to be running in the same commercial break as like an ad from Ford or an ad from Coca-Cola, so we really need like high production value to make sure we're consistent with where the ad's running. And I feel like this, it's like the reverse message people need now, where like um like your message is going to be in someone's tick needs to be in someone's TikTok feed, where they're used to seeing regular people that they don't know. It's not like somebody that they have a relationship with. And a lot of these creators are kind of more micro creators. Like it's a lot of just regular people on TikTok
Right.
who make
Right.
a video and it happens to catch a wave of the algorithm and get served a bunch. And um the more produced, the more polished. This kind of goes to what we were talking about with candidates. Like, if you feel too scripted, that doesn't work in that medium. It comes across as phony when you're flipping through your FYP or whatever. So there's this almost like reversal of people don't trust institutions, they trust other people. And we need to talk about things and
Yeah.
sound like other people.
And we need to stop being so precious
Yes.
about like, hey, if some random poster came up with the thing that's going viral, or like there's a tweet screenshot or a meme someone found on a Reddit
Mhm.
thread and puts that into their Facebook feed, like everyone should jump on that.
Yeah.
Like we don't need to shy away from it. It does not have to be the like polished, produced thing, which I know is a frustrating thing for a lot of our friends, on creative teams throughout the. But we have to change our approach. I mean, it's just we live and die by the algorithm gods, and whatever is going to actually reach people and have an impact, we need to optimize our programs to those kinds of content and those formats.
Yeah, and 100% agree with that, and it's not that we shouldn't, because another one of my frustrations is, like, there is still a total role for producing original content. It's not that, like, we shouldn't be producing more polished assets, it's just that they need to be, like, longer form things for YouTube, not,
Right.
3-minute web videos for galas or whatever. Like, we need to be, again, sort of matching the mediums and producing assets for those mediums, and
Yep.
there is a ton of original content that our side can and should be producing that isn't just like memes. But
Right.
and we're not doing that part very well either. A few examples of people who are, I mean, I have nothing to do with this. I'm just a big longtime fan of A More Perfect Union, and I think that they're a really good model of, they produce a bunch of different types of sort of, not quality, it's all high quality, but like low production value versus high production value assets. And I think it's an interesting mix of like what modern media mixes can look like. Yes, there's screenshots of tweets, and then there's also longer form in the field docu pieces
Yep.
and explainer classroom style videos and interviews and all these different things. And getting more people to understand that like serving the algorithm gods is about trying a bunch of different formats and producing a bunch of different things and then seeing what hits is like it's challenging to get people to buy into that. But
Totally. Well, and it's so much easier, to your point, on the short form, quick turn platforms. You can throw 10 things at the wall and see what sticks relatively cheaply and relatively quickly. With YouTube, and I agree, it's like YouTube and podcasts, and obviously it's all intertwined. Um, we need to make major investments.
yes.
Like, there are a few personalities, there are a few, progressive news media companies that are doing good work in this space, but like that's where we really need investment. It takes time. It takes people that can actually, produce meaningful long form content.
Yeah.
And it can't be this like, oh, let's do a 6 show pilot for like, a shoestring budget. And like, we really need to figure out how are
Are
we
you in my
bringing
inbox right
on.
now? Get out of my inbox, Alex.
We're both getting way too many of those these days, but it's we need to make long-term investments in media and like bring on 20 different personalities and see who works. Like I think we have to be okay with failing. If the right had been so hesitant to dump serious money into this space over the last couple decades, they would not have built up
Right.
the infrastructure that they've built up. And so I think, it's the more examples that we can show of sort of the gap here, the better, because we really need funders to step up and actually make long-term investments in progressive long-form content.
How and share whatever you're comfortable with, and we can also like always, you know, we have control over this content. So if we want to cut this, we can cut this. But I'm curious if what your perspective is as somebody who is actually pitching this kind of work to get funded. And like we are all reading these think pieces about how, to some extent, there's like an appetite among funders to support this kind of stuff. Like, do you think we're making progress as a space on this? Are we getting more of our funders to understand this problem and steer resources this way? Or like, what can folks do to help that, or what are the
Yeah.
challenges we have to overcome to get there? Like, just I don't have as much insight into the funder world, so I'm curious for your take.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say two things. I think we're making progress on the education piece. I think there are a number of good folks who are, putting together overviews of here's the groups that are doing really good work in this space, and here's who falls into what category, here's who's filling what gaps. And I do think, there's meaningful, insights that are being shared with donors, with folks, across this ecosystem. I think the challenge is, and this is not just a challenge in the funding space, it's a challenge in the party right now, is there is no center of gravity.
Mm,
There's no, we have a leadership vacuum right now where,
mm,
there is not one group, one, party leader, one president, certainly one nominee who's really driving here's where the strategy is going, here's what decisions need to be made. And so I think that has sort of frozen people in place a little bit to get a
mm,
sense of like there's a bunch of seeds that we've planted, and there's a decent chance that if they got investment we would see a bunch of flowers bloom, figure out what's taking off and double down on the best strategies. But right now, in lieu of any sort of center of gravity, we really do need to take a little bit more of a dispersed approach and
mm,
get folks comfortable with the idea that like something might fail,
yeah,
five things might fail, and that's okay, but the two things that take off are going to be way more than worth it,
yeah.
for the kinds of investments that they're making. So but it's a challenge, it's a tough time right now.
Tough sledding, as they say.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else we want to cover in terms of like things we can be doing or solutions that folks should be investing in? Like we've talked about the social listening and media monitoring infrastructure to like actually understand the media water we're swimming in. Um, any other pieces you're working on at Resonate that we can unpack?
I think the other pieces, working with as many elected officials, different progressive voices as we can to train them and educate, give them the tools to dive into these spaces and, be successful in their own right. And then the amplification piece, like the
Yeah.
more we can really convene and collaborate with as many folks that have a megaphone and have a voice, as possible. And so I think just encouraging collaboration across the board. It's like, you know, I think we're at our worst as a movement when we're building a bunch of walled gardens that aren't talking to each other. And you've got this little cluster of projects over here and that little cluster of projects over there. Like, not to say that all of those things aren't, worthwhile, so many of them, but they need to be talking to each other and they need to be working together. Like,
Mm.
we have enough enemies between Trump, between MAGA Republicans, between a Supreme Court that apparently is just going to let him do whatever the hell he wants now, funders on the other side. It's like we do not need to be fighting amongst ourselves. It's
Yeah.
like you look at I think the most infuriating thing to me, to be honest, is the reaction to Mamdani's win in the primary. It's like you may agree with him on one thing, you may agree with him on 10 things, you may agree with him on nothing, but like you have to acknowledge that what he did was really smart and really strategic when it comes to his communication strategy. There are so many lessons to be learned from how he communicated and how his campaign ran, and reading the room, like doing things the same old way, dumping a bunch of money into TV ads and not just jumping online on the platforms where people are actually consuming content and engaging with them, collaborating with folks in celebrity world and niche New York circles, just talking to people on the street about issues that they care about. There is a treasure trove of lessons to go learn from the way he ran his campaign, and the people that are just sniping at it as like the end of American capitalism as we know it, I feel like is so counterproductive and irritating.
Yeah, and, like, I just saw, the epic rise in hate speech that flooded the internet, targeting Mamdani, so there's also, like, you know, people are criticizing him based on identity, based on style of campaigning and
Yeah.
tactics. He's really catching it on all fronts, and like it's really hard to see how we win if that's our reaction to when somebody does.
Right. The one candidate who finally actually, gets some steam and solves some of these problems, at
Yeah.
least within a finite election, we got to build on that. We can't
Yeah.
be trashing it.
Yeah. One of the biggest headaches we run into on this front is everybody like wants in theory to run that kind of campaign. But if you look at, and this has been covered, I think Rachel Carton's link in bio covered this, but
Oh, yeah.
Mamdani worked with a video production team on a regular basis to not like a full scale 2-day giant shoot, every month, but they were producing lightweight, scrappy, but still resourced productions to make all of that content. That is not how most campaigns think about allocating resources. This is like a very touchy soapbox for me at the moment, but like getting a lot of campaigns to even hire a dedicated social media manager as, like, a full-time role is kind of like that's where we are. The
Yeah.
only campaigns that dedicate a role we still love to call a digital director and make them do 8 million different jobs. So the idea of carving out social media
Drives
as
me nuts. Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
fundraising and email and websites and digital organizing and all these different pieces are not the same as producing content for social media. That's like a very different thing. So step 1 is like setting that aside as its own discrete area of expertise that needs to be resourced with staff capacity. And then 2, like a kid with a phone can do a lot but can't do everything. And so we really still need some amount of video production at campaigns of any scale. Like this shouldn't be as revolutionary as it sounds, but I think honestly like that's what I'm hearing when people react so strongly to Mom Donnie is like he did it differently. He spent his money differently.
Right.
And
Right.
that's what people are, like, freaked out about, and I don't know. It's really, it can be a little demoralizing because then you go and you present it to people and you're like, "You wanna do that? Here's what it looks like," and they're like, "We can't spend that." It's like, "Okay, let's just keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results." I think there's a word for that, but
Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, they look at it and say that's a lot of money. On the other hand, how much
Mhm.
do we spend on TV ads every single campaign? And it's like if you took an extra 30% of that money and put
Oh
it
my god.
into organic content production, distribution, partnerships work, it's a game changer.
Yep. 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 I'm happy to parrot the arguments back that I get because 'cause I've been these are my talking points.
Yeah.
Um, it's just, I do think it goes back to what you said at the top, which is, like, fluency. I'm pitching investment in something that a lot of people don't use, so they don't get it, and they don't think it matters. And I don't know how to fix that unless we just make it a mandate that every candidate has to spend an hour a night on TikTok or something.
Yeah. Yeah. There's I'm curious to get your thoughts on this too of like one thing, in many cases resources just aren't being spent, appropriately or proportionally. In other cases there just literally aren't that many
Totally,
resources. And
totally,
so one thing that we've been talking to partners about is like, hey, there are some great AI powered tools out there right now that make video editing, captioning, versioning out of content so much easier and more streamlined and super cost effective. And obviously, I want to be super mindful of like AI as a tool. AI should make us smarter and better at our work. It should
totally,
not be like replacing human beings and strategists on campaigns and in offices. But when you have finite resources,
totally,
how can you take a staff of 2 or 3 and empower them to be able to do the work of so many more when you don't have that. And I think there are tools out there that are really easy to use. Folks on campaigns can and should be adopting them to make their content production shops a lot more robust.
100%. We use them to produce this show. So, um, I don't think and, we're learning this. They aren't as far along as we might hope, but they do get you, like, they're certainly not replacing people at this point, but it's probably not that far out, and, everything will always need a human to review sort of for um, brand and message alignment for, there's certain things that humans just always need to quality control. But it saves a ton of time, and a job that might have taken a half a day could take a couple hours, or an hour or whatever.
Yep.
So there's
Yep.
just a lot of efficiency that can be gained from using these tools. Um, yeah, I think that's definitely where we're going. And I mean, I think it's like part of this shift that we aren't our job is not to go get legacy media to cover us. Our job, we are all now content studios, and some people are running a one or two person content studio. And really, what we need more people to understand is if you have resources, you need to be resourcing your own larger scale content production operation.
Yeah.
Um, and I think building out tool sets like this help all of those teams at all of those levels. And shout out to Hardpin, our partner, who has like spent a lot of energy and time and resources in educating themselves and educating me and educating their clients on how to use these things effectively. It's definitely where we're going. Um, okay, speaking of more where we're going and hot takes, I want to take us to the hot takes hotline, Alex.
Give us a call at the Hot Takes Hotline.
Okay, so here at Novel, we have a hotline. And if you're listening to this, we would love for you to call in and share your hot takes. You heard plenty from us, but we want to hear from you. If you have a hot take, call us at 1-844-4-HOT-TAKES, and you might hear it on our next recording. You get 60 seconds. It's totally anonymous. Just call, leave us a message, let it rip. Okay, we've got one that came in recently that I think you might appreciate, Alex. So let's go ahead and play it from the hotline.
Why are we still writing press releases? What is a press release? What is the point of that? Who is reading those? Why are there 5 people who get paid on any campaign in any elected office who write press releases, and we have to like beg to get people to do digital strategy and get the funding for that? Press releases reach 4 journalists. The 4 journalists reach like 5 people. Can we just be honest about that? Let's be honest about that. Kill the press release. Stop paying people to write press releases. Also, AI can do it. We don't need them. We don't need them. Let's just get rid of them. That's my take. It's hot. Here you go.
Any thoughts on that?
Oh my God. I was trying to guess. I was like, ooh, this voice sounds familiar. Do I know who this is who called
You
in?
probably do.
Um, I could not have said it any better. I think it's in no shade. I always try to preface this with like there are so many comms professionals that are incredibly smart and they do incredible work, and like their talents should be respected enough to have them focused on products that are actually going to reach people in the places where we need to reach them. And so, whether that's building out LinkedIn strategies, obviously Twitter and Blue Sky, you've got so many other ways to talk to reporters, to media influencers, to folks in different issue sectors that have platforms across so many different social media platforms. There is so much quote unquote traditional comms work that can be easily adopted into all those spaces.
Oh, yeah.
This is not rocket science. Like, obviously it takes work and skill, but like completely agree. If we were putting out a press release, we're doing it wrong. And we need to be reaching people that can report on news in places that are actually going to get eyeballs on all these issues. So if I never saw another press release again, I would be thrilled. It's just not how we communicate.
And it still feels like dangerous to say that. I don't know, because like there are still so many organizations where like if you took the retainer that they're paying to some comm shop to write and send press releases and like get them hits, even though like I don't do this work, so maybe I'm wrong. And if you disagree, call the hot takes hotline and tell me all the reasons I'm wrong. But um, I feel like most stories get placed because of relationships that people hold with reporters. It's not the press release that's like generating the coverage. It's somebody holds a relationship. And there are still many people who are paying five-figure retainers to firms to basically access those relationships. But if you come with a five-figure budget for content production, you're laughed out of the room. Like, we couldn't possibly spend these resources. And I think it's just that shift of like, we don't need to go buy access to networks to then get other networks to cover our stuff. We could just talk about our stuff. We can just talk about it and publish it and then get other networks, creator networks, or newer journalists who are self-publishing to amplify and share. It's just a total pivot, and honestly, like my biggest frustration, and the press release is kind of like the symbol of this, is there's no real reason we aren't making these changes, and you can't claim there's not data, you can't claim there's not case studies to the Mamdani point. Like, I mean, I would argue, like, going back multiple cycles, there's multiple case studies of the candidates who kinda do this right are the candidates that win, and we still get
Definitely.
shocked every time. Anyway, um, you can't claim anymore to not have enough information or evidence to make these changes. So I'm really frustrated, like, what is the hang up? And I think it's just like inertia. It's just like, but this is what we've always done, and this is how we make our money or whatever. And it's like, I know it's hard, but maybe as a millennial who's watched the way we do things get upended multiple times, and I've always just had to adjust, like, yeah, we have to adjust. And sometimes
Yeah.
that's tough, but that's what we got to do.
I mean, I think it gets back to another pet peeve of mine for a long time, and I know many digital strategists, which is many who came from comms, traditional comms, which I did, and I know many others have as well, is there should be no difference between a communications team and a digital team.
Yeah.
Like, communications is digital, digital is communications,
Yeah.
and any person who's leading a communications shop needs to be digitally savvy and digitally fluent in terms of what are the platforms that matter. If you aren't, totally fluent in any one, like, are you hiring and putting and empowering the right people to who are, on those platforms all the time to make those decisions, and making sure that they are a core part of any organization or campaign's communication strategy. And there's been for too many years, it's like, oh, maybe next cycle we combine the comms and digital teams, or oh, maybe next time we'll put digital, throughout all of our communications instead of like the junior staffer who reports up through the comms apparatus.
Yep.
And, until we do that, it's all backwards.
I know. Like, to some extent, like, you and I are not junior staffers anymore, and, like, we've led big teams and big budgets, but there's still this sort of, like, junior staffer vibe when you are at a, like, leadership table that I just, like, I don't know how we get over this. We gotta get over ourselves, or maybe when different generations are the ones in charge. There used to be this thing called retirement that people would do. We'll see. That might help with some of this. Anyway, that's really spicy. Okay. All right. I won't make you weigh in on that. Okay. I'm gonna wrap us up, but Alex, I really appreciate it. Like, thanks for coming and sharing all this. You've done so much great work on this. I really hope people listen and learn and go subscribe and like take it in, because I really think you're showing us all like not just the way forward, but you're literally giving us the tools for free. So thank you for doing that and leading that work. For folks who want to follow along, you could stay up to date on Resonate by following their Substack, what's resonating.substack.com. You can follow Alex on LinkedIn. And make sure you subscribe and follow us over here at Novel Ideas. We also are on Substack at novelmessaging.substack.com, and we're at Novel Messaging on YouTube. And last, call the hotline. Tell us what you think about all this. 1-844-4-HOT-TAKES. We want to hear from you. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time with more novel ideas.